Welcome to the debate on the legalization of marijuana. This issue sits at the intersection of public health, criminal justice, economics, and personal freedom. As more jurisdictions around the world reconsider their stance on cannabis, the question remains, should marijuana be legalized? Let's start with an entry speech of each side.
First, consider the economic impact. Legal cannabis is already driving job growth, tax revenue, and business opportunities. In the U.S. alone, the legal cannabis sector supports hundreds of thousands of jobs, with some estimates projecting over $130 billion in federal tax revenue through 2025, funds that can be reinvested in public services, schools, and infrastructure. Second, let's talk public safety. Regulation undercuts the illegal market and frees up law enforcement to focus on serious crime. Studies consistently show legalization doesn't raise crime rates, and in many cases, violent and property crime declines. Third, there's public health and harm reduction. Legal cannabis serves as a safer alternative to opioids. Medical marijuana legalization has been linked with a roughly 25% drop in opiate overdose deaths. Finally, fairness demands action. Criminalization has disproportionately harmed marginalized communities. Shifting to legalization enables investments in equity and justice reforms, while expunging low-level convictions. In short, legalization offers a balanced approach: controlled access, boosted economies, safer communities, and reduced harm. I look forward to hearing the opposing side's concerns, but tonight, let's ensure our policies reflect data, compassion, and common sense.
I oppose the legalization of marijuana because it poses significant risks to public health and safety. Regular use is linked to cognitive impairment, increased mental health issues like anxiety and psychosis, and a higher likelihood of substance abuse disorders. Legalization normalizes use, potentially increasing access for minors, as seen in states where it's already legal. Drug driving incidents also rise, endangering lives. Prohibition, coupled with education and prevention, better protects our communities than the uncertainties of legalization. In short, legalization offers a balanced approach: controlled access, boosted economies, safer communities, and reduced harm. I look forward to hearing the opposing side's concerns, but tonight, let's ensure our policies reflect data, compassion, and common sense.
The first chapter of questions will cover the topic of framing and legal considerations. Question 1. How do we weigh individual liberty against potential societal harm when legalizing marijuana?
John Stuart Mill's harm principle offers the most compelling way to balance individual freedom with societal risk. In On Liberty, 1859, he argued that the only purpose for which power can be rightfully exercised is to prevent harm to others, and that a person's own good, physical or moral, is not sufficient justification for interference. Under this view, private adult use of marijuana causes no direct harm to others and belongs outside the reach of criminal law unless it clearly leads to third-party harm. Critics challenge Mill's principle by pointing out that private drug use often has indirect effects on family, employers, and public services. Mill himself acknowledged that some constructive injury to society might occur, but argued that society can afford these costs in exchange for preserving individual liberty. Thus, the occasional costs of treatment or social services don't justify criminalization. Another dimension is cognitive liberty. The right to control one's own mind and consciousness. Ethicists argue that private consumption of mind-altering substances is a core aspect of mental self-determination, a fundamental human right. Forbidding marijuana use without direct harm to others intrudes on this right. What about protecting others from risks like impaired driving or secondhand smoke? Mill would say regulation, not prohibition, is the answer. Laws against driving under the influence, age restrictions, and bans on public smoking are fully consistent with preventing harm to others, while allowing responsible private use. Ultimately, very few private behaviors administered in moderation lead to direct societal harm. And morally, it is far more defensible to regulate risky behavior than to criminalize it wholesale. Mill's baseline is clear: freedom prevails unless there is demonstrable, direct harm. In our debate, we uphold that principle, urging policies that safeguard public safety without unnecessarily curtailing liberty.
When weighing individual liberty against societal harm in the context of marijuana legalization, the central question is whether private use actually infringes upon the rights and well-being of others. According to J.S. Mill's harm principle, the only legitimate reason to restrict a person's freedom is to prevent harm to others, not to protect them from harming themselves. Private adult use that doesn't cause others to suffer falls outside this criterion. However, real-world evidence shows that cannabis use does affect third parties through driving impairment, increased youth exposure, and public health costs. Even if the individual is acting only for themselves, there can be societal repercussions that warrant intervention. Mill himself allowed for regulation to prevent harm, even if some indirect effects are borne by society. What counts as harm, though, isn't always clear. Critics argue that Mill's principle is ambiguous when trying to define whether societal costs, like healthcare burdens or auto accidents, justify restrictions. Another perspective, from thinkers like Joel Feinberg, is that society may restrict behavior that, while not physically harmful, deeply offends public sensibilities or undermines civic norms. That kind of harmless immorality may warrant regulation, especially if it contributes to broader societal decline. From a public health paternalistic standpoint, even Mill's strict individualism might be too narrow. Some argue that preventing serious long-term social harms like youth addiction or health system strain can justify regulation that preserves freedom for most, but limits it where harm is foreseeable. Ultimately, striking the balance means asking, do the harms to others clearly outweigh the individual's interest in personal autonomy? If private cannabis use demonstrably increases accidents, hospitalization, or impaired youth outcomes, then limited regulation, age limits, public restrictions, impairment laws may be morally justified even if it slightly limits liberty. That's the ethical tension. We must protect society from real harms while ensuring we don't imprison adults for self-regarding choices. The question isn't whether we care about freedom or safety, they both matter, but how to explain when liberty ends and the duty to protect others begins.
Would legalization actually reduce the illicit cannabis market as supporters claim or inadvertently sustain it as opponents warn?
Evidence shows that legalization can significantly reduce the illicit cannabis market, but only when laws are smartly crafted and enforced. When legal products are competitively priced, widely available, and safe, consumers overwhelmingly choose them over black market sources. This trend has been demonstrated in places like Canada, where a growing share of users shifted to regulated dispensaries as legal stores multiplied and prices fell. However, legalization by itself isn't enough. If taxes remain too high, regulatory hurdles limit access, or illegal operations fly under the radar, the black market thrives. In places like California and New York, illicit growers and unlicensed storefronts have continued to flourish despite legalization, benefiting from lower prices, fewer regulations, and limited enforcement. The key to success lies in finding the sweet spot, moderate taxes and fees that keep prices fair, accessible legal outlets to meet demand, and consistent crackdowns on illegal sellers. When these elements are balanced, legalization can undercut illicit suppliers, drawing consumers into the legal market. Without that balance, legalization risks sustaining or even empowering the illicit market it sought to replace.
Despite the expectation that marijuana legalization would eliminate the illicit market, evidence indicates that it has, in many cases, sustained or even expanded it. In states like California and New York, the black market for cannabis remains robust, with illegal dispensaries and unlicensed growers continuing to operate alongside legal businesses. These illicit operations often offer lower prices and fewer regulatory burdens, making them attractive to consumers. Consequently, the legal market struggles to compete, leading to a situation where both markets coexist, rather than the legal one supplanting the illegal one. Furthermore, the persistence of the black market has been associated with various negative outcomes, including environmental degradation and increased violence. Illegal cultivation often involves harmful practices such as illegal pesticide use and water diversion, leading to significant environmental harm. Additionally, the competition between legal and illegal markets has sometimes resulted in violent confrontations and criminal activity, undermining public safety. These developments suggest that legalization alone is insufficient to dismantle the illicit cannabis market. Without comprehensive regulatory frameworks, effective enforcement, and measures to address the economic incentives driving the black market, legalization may inadvertently perpetuate the very issues it aims to resolve.
Now we'll discuss the economic impacts. What are the realistic economic benefits, tax revenue, job creation, and how do they compare to regulatory and enforcement costs?
Legalizing marijuana offers substantial economic benefits, including significant tax revenue and job creation, which often outweigh the costs associated with regulation and enforcement. In states with established legal cannabis markets, tax revenues have been impressive. For instance, New York's marijuana tax revenue reached $161.8 million for the fiscal year ending March 31, 2025, and is projected to grow to $374 million by 2029. These funds are typically allocated to public services such as education, healthcare, and infrastructure. Additionally, the cannabis industry has created a substantial number of jobs. By 2023, over 440,000 full-time positions were supported by the legal cannabis sector in the United States. These jobs span various roles, including cultivation, retail, security, and compliance, contributing to a diversified and resilient labor market. When comparing these economic gains to regulatory and enforcement costs, the benefits often surpass the expenditures. For example, Colorado's regulatory costs for marijuana totaled approximately $25.7 million in 2020, while the state generated over $274 million in tax revenue from cannabis sales in the same year. This indicates a favorable return on investment, with revenues significantly exceeding regulatory expenses. Moreover, legalization reduces law enforcement costs by decreasing arrests and prosecutions related to marijuana offenses, allowing resources to be reallocated to more pressing public safety concerns. In summary, the economic advantages of legalizing marijuana, through enhanced tax revenues and job creation, substantially outweigh the costs of regulation and enforcement, making it a financially sound policy choice.
Legalizing marijuana presents significant economic challenges that often outweigh the anticipated benefits. While proponents highlight potential tax revenues and job creation, the reality is more complex. In states like Colorado, for instance, the costs associated with legalization, including healthcare expenses, law enforcement, and regulatory enforcement, have been substantial. These expenditures often surpass the revenue generated from cannabis sales. Additionally, the legal cannabis market faces competition from the persistent illicit market, which can undermine the financial benefits of legalization. Moreover, the legalization of marijuana has been linked to various social costs, such as increased substance use disorders, chronic homelessness, and traffic-related incidents. These issues not only affect public health, but also impose additional financial burdens on state resources. In summary, the economic and social costs associated with marijuana legalization can be significant, and without careful planning and regulation, the anticipated benefits may not materialize as expected.
Does decriminalization without full legalization offer a more equitable solution?
Decriminalization, while a step forward, does not offer the comprehensive, equitable solution that full legalization provides. Although decriminalization reduces criminal penalties for possession, it fails to establish a legal market, leaving communities without the economic opportunities and social justice reforms that legalization can facilitate. Full legalization enables the creation of a regulated cannabis industry that generates significant tax revenue. These funds can be reinvested into communities disproportionately affected by past marijuana laws, supporting education, healthcare, and economic development initiatives. Additionally, legalization allows for the establishment of social equity programs that provide grants, loans, and training to individuals from impacted communities, fostering entrepreneurship and job creation within the legal cannabis market. Moreover, legalization facilitates the expungement of past cannabis-related convictions, removing barriers to employment and housing for individuals previously incarcerated or penalized under outdated laws. This proactive approach addresses the long-term consequences of the war on drugs and promotes restorative justice. In contrast, decriminalization alone does not dismantle the illegal market or address the systemic inequities perpetuated by previous cannabis laws. Without a legal framework, the illicit market continues to thrive, and communities remain without the resources and opportunities needed for meaningful change. Therefore, while decriminalization is a positive move, it is insufficient on its own. Full legalization, accompanied by robust equity provisions, offers a more comprehensive and just solution to the harms caused by past marijuana policies.
Decriminalization of marijuana offers a more equitable solution compared to full legalization, particularly for communities disproportionately affected by the war on drugs. While full legalization can create economic opportunities, it often leads to the concentration of wealth and power in the hands of a few, leaving marginalized communities behind. In contrast, decriminalization reduces criminal penalties without establishing a commercial market, thereby avoiding the risk of perpetuating economic disparities. Moreover, decriminalization allows for the allocation of resources toward public health approaches, such as education and treatment programs, rather than enforcement. This shift can more effectively address the root causes of substance use and its associated harms, fostering a more just and equitable society. In summary, decriminalization provides a more equitable path forward by mitigating the risk of economic exploitation and focusing on public health and restorative justice.
What are the public safety risks associated with marijuana-impaired driving or workplace impairment?
While it's crucial to acknowledge that marijuana use can impair cognitive and motor functions, leading to potential safety risks in both driving and workplace settings, it's equally important to recognize that these risks are not insurmountable and can be mitigated through thoughtful regulation and public education. In the context of driving, marijuana use can affect reaction times, coordination, and decision-making abilities. However, studies have shown that drivers under the influence of marijuana tend to drive more cautiously, often reducing speed and increasing following distances. This cautious behavior may offset some of the impairments caused by marijuana use. Additionally, the increase in traffic accidents observed in some regions following marijuana legalization may be influenced by various factors, including increased reporting and changes in enforcement practices, rather than solely by marijuana impairment. Regarding workplace safety, marijuana use can impact attention and motor skills. However, employers can address these concerns by implementing clear policies, providing education on the effects of marijuana, and promoting a culture of safety. Moreover, the legalization of marijuana allows for better regulation of its quality and potency, reducing the risks associated with unregulated, illicit products. In summary, while marijuana use does present certain safety risks, these can be effectively managed through responsible regulation, public education, and workplace policies. By approaching the issue proactively, we can minimize potential harms and maximize the benefits of legalization.
Marijuana impairment poses significant public safety risks, particularly in driving and workplace environments. These risks are not merely theoretical but are supported by increasing evidence and real-world incidents. Cannabis use impairs critical driving skills, including reaction time, coordination, and judgment. Unlike alcohol, THC, the psychoactive component in marijuana, is fat-soluble and can remain in the body long after its impairing effects have subsided, making it challenging to assess current impairment accurately. This discrepancy complicates law enforcement efforts to identify and penalize impaired drivers effectively. The legalization of marijuana has been associated with an increase in traffic fatalities. For instance, in Colorado, traffic deaths where drivers tested positive for cannabis increased by 138% since the state's legalization, while overall traffic deaths rose by 29%. This suggests that marijuana impairment contributes to a significant portion of these fatalities. Time.com. NSC.org. Marijuana use can impair cognitive and motor functions, leading to increased workplace accidents and injuries. Employees who test positive for marijuana have been found to have 55% more industrial accidents, 85% more injuries, and 75% greater absenteeism compared to those who test negative. These impairments are particularly concerning in safety-sensitive industries such as construction, transportation, and manufacturing. The difficulty in accurately assessing impairment due to marijuana further complicates workplace safety. Unlike alcohol, where blood alcohol concentration provides a clear measure of impairment, no such standard exists for marijuana. Current testing methods detect the presence of THC, but do not reliably indicate whether an individual is impaired at the time of testing. The public safety risks associated with marijuana impairment in driving and the workplace are substantial and cannot be overlooked. While proponents of legalization argue for personal freedom, the potential harm to public safety necessitates a cautious approach. Without effective measures to address these risks, the negative consequences of marijuana impairment could outweigh the benefits of legalization.
Does society have a principle of liberty argument strong enough to justify legalization, even if risks remain?
Yes, society possesses a compelling principle of liberty argument to justify the legalization of marijuana, even if certain risks remain. This argument is grounded in the fundamental belief that individuals have the right to autonomy over their own bodies and personal choices, provided their actions do not harm others. John Stuart Mill's harm principle articulates that the only legitimate reason for society to exercise power over an individual against their will is to prevent harm to others. Applying this principle, the state has no rightful authority to prohibit adult marijuana use solely because it may pose risks to the user. Such paternalistic interventions infringe upon personal liberty and autonomy. As noted by Ludwig von Mises, once the principle is accepted that the government should protect individuals from their own choices, it opens the door to further encroachments on personal freedoms. Furthermore, the enforcement of marijuana prohibition often leads to significant societal harms, including racial disparities in arrests and incarceration, violations of privacy, and the allocation of law enforcement resources away from more serious crimes. Legalization, by contrast, can reduce these injustices, promote individual freedoms, and allow law enforcement to focus on more pressing public safety concerns. While acknowledging the potential risks associated with marijuana use, these do not justify the infringement on personal liberty. Instead, society should implement measures such as public education, regulation, and harm reduction strategies to mitigate these risks, all while respecting individual autonomy. In conclusion, the principle of individual liberty provides a robust foundation for the legalization of marijuana. Protecting personal freedoms and autonomy is paramount, and the state's role should be to prevent harm to others, not to regulate personal choices that do not infringe upon the rights of others.
While the principle of liberty is foundational to many arguments for marijuana legalization, a closer examination reveals that the state's interest in protecting individual freedom may, in fact, justify prohibition. Marijuana use impairs cognitive functions such as memory, judgment, and motor coordination. These impairments undermine an individual's capacity to make rational decisions, thereby compromising personal autonomy. As Timothy Seow argues, freedom isn't merely the ability to act, but the ability to act under the influence of properly functioning cognitive faculties. Drugs that degrade cognition, like marijuana, conflict with the goal of protecting individual liberty by undermining the conditions needed for free action. Moreover, the legalization of marijuana may inadvertently promote a culture of dependency. As noted by the Weston A. Price Foundation, marijuana use can trigger mood disorders, psychosis, and schizophrenia, and it impairs cognitive function. For the 10% of users who become addicted, it is one of the toughest addictions to beat. This dependency can erode personal responsibility and autonomy, leading to a diminished capacity for self-governance. Furthermore, the state's role extends beyond protecting individuals from harm caused by others. It also encompasses protecting individuals from self-inflicted harm that impairs their ability to function as autonomous agents. In this light, prohibiting substances that compromise cognitive faculties aligns with the state's duty to safeguard the conditions necessary for individual liberty. In conclusion, while the principle of liberty is vital, it must be understood in the context of preserving the conditions that make true freedom possible. The state's interest in protecting individuals from substances that impair cognitive functions justifies marijuana prohibition, ensuring that personal autonomy is not undermined by self-inflicted harm.